President Trump nominates Judge Neil Gorsuch for Supreme Court Justice. Judge Gorsuch is a 10th Circuit Federal Appeals Court judge appointed by former President George W. Bush. He has degrees from Harvard and Oxford and is known to have a judicial philosophy modeled after the justice he would replace, the late Antonin Scalia. Joining me now to talk about the president's pick are CBS News senior political editor Steve Chigueras, Democratic strategist Emily Tish Sussman, and Liz Wheeler from One America News Network. All right, reaction. First of all, let me go to you, Liz. What is the message to Republicans and conservatives in particular with the selection of Judge Gorsuch by President Trump?
I mean, I think this is a phenomenal pick. This is remarkable. One of the reasons, I think, looking back throughout the primary, throughout the campaign, one of the reasons a lot of conservatives, very hardcore conservatives, voted for Donald Trump was because of the Supreme Court. And I'm talking, of course, about the never-Trumpers here. They voted for Trump because of the Supreme Court pick. I mean, what are we, 10, 11 days into a Trump presidency now? He's not disappointing. This guy, Judge Neil Gorsuch, is a solid conservative. He does take after the late Justice Scalia. I think conservatives across the country, this may be a happier day even than when President Trump was elected.
Emily, let me ask you, what is the strategy for Democrats now? How bitter a fight are you anticipating?
I think it'll be a very difficult fight for him. The Republicans have certainly shown that they have no appetite for returning to any sort of norms in the Senate. And certainly the President Trump has not indicated there should be any sort of regular norms. So Democrats are going to fight with everything they have against this nominee. It's what the majority of the people want. He was not elected by the majority of the people, and people do not want this going on in the Supreme Court. Look, we can have 4 years of Trump, or we can have 40 years of Trump. And the Democrats are going to hold a very hard line against him. I think Trump with this pick is making sort of a political calculation that, look, I think that's right, that a lot of never-Trumpers got on board with him because of this Supreme Court pick. And he has done everything, Trump has done everything out of the mainstream and been incredibly extreme in his first 11 days of office. And Republicans on the Hill, in the Senate and in the House, are basically making a bet that they should let him get away with this, even though they know it is counter to the fundamental core of democracy. They're going to let him get away with it because they would get this pick in the Supreme Court. And they'll let it slide.
Steve, what about what Emily just said there? Is this pick a unifying factor for Republicans in particular?
Yeah, there's no question it's unifying for Republicans. And keep in mind one thing. Trump has now, yet again, changed the subject. We've been talking about controversies. We've been talking about travel bans. We've been talking about chaos in the Trump administration, the first days of the Trump administration. Now we're going to be talking about a Supreme Court fight, which is going to take center stage over the coming weeks. It's interesting, Emily's take on Democrats standing up to this nominee. I do have to point out that the Republicans in the Senate have one trump card, not to make a joke there, but they do have one trump card, which is the nuclear option. And that's something that has not been used for Supreme Court nominees, but Republicans in the majority can just say, can launch the nuclear option and say, fine, we're just going to have a simple majority to approve this nominee. Democrats have a choice to make. Do they want to put up a huge fight and trigger the nuclear option on this pick, or do they want to hold their fire and wait until a later pick? Because basically the calculus is this. Some Democrats figure, if they use the nuclear option now, if the Republicans use the nuclear option now, then for the next vacancy on the Supreme Court, if it happens under Trump's watch, and it's still a Republican Senate, then they will nominate someone even more extremely conservative than somebody like Gorsuch. So they're trying to figure this out. Schumer and others are trying to figure this out on the Democratic side, whether to put up a fight, but not too big of a fight to trigger the nuclear option from the Republicans. We'll see how they handle this. The other part of this, as I mentioned earlier, Elaine, is that we do have to watch some of these moderate Democrats, especially the 10 Democrats who are running for re-election in states that were won by Trump. They're running for re-election in November of 2018. And if they stand up against this nominee, there's no question that's going to be a major issue in their re-election fights next year.
Let me ask you, Liz, what about the chances of Republicans using the nuclear option? What do you think realistically those chances are? And what about the calculus that Steve just laid out there on the Democratic side, trying to balance whether or not this nominee is worth that, or if it's the next nominee instead that they'll be focusing their political firepower on?
Right, because it is a matter of political capital in a sense here. Do they want to use all their ammunition against Judge Gorsuch, or do they want to wait? But I think the important thing to note here is the Democrats have an option here about whether or not they want to be hypocrites. They're the ones that used this nuclear option in 2013. It was introduced at the time by Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, actually against the advice of now Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. That's ironic, so that'll come into play here. But they have the choice of whether they want to be hypocrites, whether they want to have a double standard here where they can do something, but then when it's reversed, the Republicans can't do something. And this, I think, is something we all need to think about as partisan political parties here in our system, is when we do something, the other party is going to be able to do it as soon as the power switches here. So I don't think the Republicans would be out of bound using the nuclear option, but I think the Democrats have to be very, very careful about what they're going to do with the filibuster, because it is at least getting to the point of a new precedent here.
As you've been speaking, Liz, we've been getting, of course, as you would expect, statements from top Republicans praising this pick by President Trump. I'll just read a couple here. We have one from Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, basically saying that Judge Gorsuch is universally respected across the ideological spectrum as a mainstream judge who applies the law without regard to person or his own preferences. By all accounts, he has a record of deciding cases based on the text of the Constitution and the law. And I'll look at Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's statement as well, essentially echoing those statements. Emily, what are your thoughts on this? The filibuster that we heard from Liz was something, as she notes, that was a tool used by Democrats.
Does it feel like we're in regular order right now? Like, does it feel like we should go by regular precedent? I don't think that's where we are right now. And given that Trump is going so strong in on consolidating executive power, on having a Congress that is not willing to stand up for him, even when it's violating on Republicans' principles, I don't think the American public is going to be very comfortable with having that third check and balance branch, the judicial branch, be another rubber stamp. That is not political. Like, that is not on a political party. That just defies logic. That is not the way that our system is set up. And I agreed with almost everything Steve said. Steve, I really liked what you're saying, almost till the end, where you were saying that the concern for red state Democrats on this issue in particular. I think that theoretically could be an issue, but not with this justice. Because Gorsuch's record is so strong on pro-business and anti-worker. That is actually where the majority of his record lies, and the majority of his opinions, and I think that will come up. And that is really, those are the Democratic voters that in fact had swung towards Trump. And so as we start to see these nominees come out that are increasingly more pro-business, more self-interested, less in line with the American worker, as we're going to start to see President Trump striking down executive orders that protect the American worker, for him to then nominate a Supreme Court justice who also stands in that ideology, I don't think it's even a choice for Democrats who come from redder states. I actually think it's become more of a Republican problem for the Republicans who are not necessarily ideologically in line with Trump, but they want to ride his wave of popularity in some of those states.
All right, let's go ahead and play a little bit of sound we have from Judge Gorsuch talking about the ability to work with folks across the aisle. Let's take a listen.
I look forward to speaking with members from both sides of the aisle, to answering their questions and to hearing their concerns. I consider the United States Senate the greatest deliberative body in the world, and I respect the important role the Constitution affords it in the confirmation of our judges. I respect, too, the fact that in our legal order, it is for Congress and not the courts to write new laws. It is the role of judges to apply, not alter, the work of the people's representatives. A judge who likes every outcome he reaches is very likely a bad judge, stretching for results he prefers rather than those the law demands.
All right, Steve, let me turn to you. The Washington Post is reporting that leading the effort to help guide Neil Gorsuch's nomination process and navigating the Senate, that effort is going to be led, according to the Washington Post, by former Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte, a moderate Republican from New Hampshire. That's according to a senior White House official the Post talked to. What could that tell us, or what does that tell us about what it is the administration may be thinking about the complexity of getting this nominee confirmed?
Well, first of all, they picked a former senator, so it's somebody who knows most of the players involved in this. She just lost her re-election bid in November, but as you mentioned, she's considered a moderate, so perhaps they feel that she can reach across the aisle and talk to Democrats about why Gorsuch isn't as evil as perhaps they think he is. Now, we'll see how that goes. It's interesting because as we were talking here, Chuck Schumer did put a statement out, the Senate Minority Leader, and this is, again, the person who's going to really decide, I think, how the Democrats approach all of this moving forward. And what he said was the burden is on Gorsuch to prove himself to be within the legal mainstream, but he has serious doubts about Gorsuch's ability to meet that standard, which is very interesting. He didn't outright say that he's opposing Gorsuch. He's giving him a chance to come in and talk to these folks and try to meet this standard of being a mainstream candidate. We'll see how that process works. Obviously, bringing somebody like Kelly Ayotte, former senator, Republican senator from New Hampshire, into that process is going to be the goal of the Republicans, to try to sway some of those Democrats onto their side.
What do you think about that, Emily, this statement that Steve just referenced from Senator Chuck Schumer?
Yeah, I think Grassley's statement as the ranking Republican is actually on that same pathway. You know, the first words in the statement were that he's a moderate and that he's in the mainstream. Mm-hmm. So clearly they're aware of the fact that he really isn't. So, you know, by starting the statement by saying that he's a moderate and by choosing Kelly Ayotte, who is considered a moderate, although not quite moderate enough for New Hampshire, but you know, that does seem to indicate where they're going with it, because they understand that he is really too extreme for most of the votes that they're going to need. And
your reaction to that, Liz, what Steve just spelled out, the statement from the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
No, I actually think we're looking at the wrong thing here. I don't think we should be looking at what the reaction is from other Republicans here. I think we should be looking from the reaction of the left. And with all due respect, Emily's comments about this being out of the norm here or being extreme, this is a perfect example of the narrative we're going to be hearing from the left over the next weeks and months as these confirmation hearings begin to happen, as the opposition research happens. In fact, Neil Gorsuch is a pretty scandal-free, non-controversial guy. His rulings, sure, they are along with our rule of law here. He's a textualist, he's an originalist like Antonin Scalia, but he's no more extreme than any of the other conservative judges. He fits actually intellectually with them very well. And when we're looking at comments, we should look at his own comments. I mean, we heard the soundbite before. He says judges on the Supreme Court should apply the law, not alter it. And he said a judge who likes all of his conclusions is not a very good judge. What he's doing is he's going to apply, and he has done this, constitutional precedent to his rulings. Democrats have an issue with that. They're going to try to label him as extreme because they don't believe, or they don't want, the Constitution to be the supreme law of our land. They believe it's a living document. They believe the role of justices is to legislate from the bench. Gorsuch won't do that. They don't like it.
All right.
I mean, what's actually interesting about that is that the cases that he is most famous for were actually not based in precedent and are different. One of them is that he strongly disagreed with Chevron, which says that where Congress has not been clear in the law, that the agency can interpret that, and the judicial branch should defer to the agency. That is longstanding precedent, and he very strongly disagrees with it in a case from last year. And the other case that he's really best known for was creating very, very large religious exemptions for private companies to then decide their religious it was around the contraception case with healthcare, so that private companies could decide for their workers. Neither of those two things actually had precedent, and those are the two cases that he is best known for.
All right, we're going to continue this discussion in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break, but as we do, we want to show you a picture now outside the Supreme Court where you can see protesters have gathered tonight. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back here on Red and Blue, more coverage of President Trump's pick of Judge Neil Gorsuch for Supreme Court Justice. Stay with us.